The ring was so powerful that it made whoever wore it immortal by protecting him from all mortal danger. There once lived a mighty king. He was considered the most powerful king in Africa. This king had a ring, and in that ring lay the secret of his power and greatness. The ring was made of gold, silver, and diamond. According to rumors, the gold was gotten from the river Nile, the silver in it was gotten from the Congo River, and the diamonds on top the ring was gotten from river Zambezi. Everyone kept speculating, but no one was absolutely sure of where it had come from. The ring was so powerful that it protected whoever wore it from physical harm. That meant that no matter how many people came charging towards the king at all corners and waving spears and axes, or even shooting arrows, he would never get hurt as long as he had the ring on. Because of this, the king wore it at all times. He wore it while passing judgments, while eating during long feasts that lasted a whole day, while sleeping in his royal bedchamber at night, and even while being carried on a special bed covered with ostrich feathers throughout the city. The king made sure that he wore his magic ring at all times except when he went for his ceremonial bath. On these occasions, the king was carried to the crystal clear pool beside the waterfall. Once he got there, all his wives, children, and servants will bow to him and then back away out of sight. Once they had left, the king would take off his gold and ivory crown, which had peacock feathers in it. He would also remove other clothes he had on. He would remove his cloak of gold, silk, and precious stones, his sandals of ebony and rhinoceros skin, and his robe made up of the purest white linen. After that, he would take off his ring and hide it in a place so secret and well concealed that none of his servants, children, or even his many wives could take a slightest guess as to where it was. As soon as he was done with his royal bath, the ring was the first thing he put on before he allowed anyone come anywhere near him. He treasured the ring so much because it made him the most powerful king in Africa. But one day, when he had stepped out of the water into the warm sun, dripping, he found out that the ring was not in the place he usually hid it. At first, the king was amazed, and with fear, he searched the places surrounding his secret hiding place. The ring was gone. Someone among all his servants, his children, and his many wives must have discovered the hiding place and dared to take the ring. Who would dare to take this ring? The king was furious, but he was also afraid, and if he offered great rewards for finding the ring, then everyone will know that he was no longer in possession of it. They would know that he was no longer protected from harm. They would also know that he was no longer the most powerful king in Africa. For days, the king sat and worried. He paced up and down his private chamber, pondering on what to do. He sat for long hours, staring at the ground or at the sky, lost in deep thought. He couldn't sleep. All his wives shook their heads in sorrow, and his children stayed away from him to avoid being yelled at. It was his favorite wife who convinced him to tell her what was wrong. Once he had confided in her, she went to the house of the wisest of all diviners. His name was Zafuza, and everyone knew of his immense wisdom and spiritual powers. She narrated everything to Zafuza, and he assured her that he had a solution. Immediately, Zafuza made his way to the palace. With wild eyes covered with white chalk and bracelets jangling on his arm, he sprang into the courtyard where the king was sitting. Zafusa was wearing a headdress with feathers attached to it, and strips of dangling leopard skin on his waist and a beaded belt. He looked like a leopard with feathers and 100 tales. He slightly listened while the king explained everything about the stolen ring. Zafusa then opened one of the leather pouches that hung from his beaded belt and took out the set of stones that he used to find answers to difficult questions. After forming a circle in the sand, he carried the bones, raised his hands towards the sky, gave a sharp cry, and then dropped them. He carefully observed the pattern in which the bones were arranged. After he had finished examining the bones, Zafusa sat down upright and looked at the king. "Your ring will be found, your majesty," he said. "The thief is not far away, he is close to us." "Who is it?" the king demanded. "You shall see," Zafusa said as he shook his head. "Send for your woodcutters, for you will not need magic." The king immediately sent for his woodcutters. Once they arrived, Zafusa explained to them what they needed to do. The next day at dawn, all those who could possibly have had the slightest opportunity to steal the ring were gathered in the great square in front of the palace. The king immediately appeared at the top of the podium and stood there. Everyone bowed down and he looked at them silently. He then clasped his hands, and soldiers appeared all around the square, ready and armed with sharpened spears so that no one could escape. Zafusa then appeared through a small pathway, looking more terrifying than usual. The white circles in his eyes were larger and strange designs were on his body. The woodcutters followed behind him with great numbers of straight wooden sticks. They gathered these sticks and hit them together in the center of the square. Zafusa started dancing around the sticks, chanting in a mysterious language that nobody had heard before. It was so clear to even the smallest child that he was casting a spell on the sticks. Finally, at the king's command, everyone in the square was given one stick each. "Take care," Zafusa said with a thunderous voice. "These sticks are full of power. Do not lose them. Make sure you have them with you throughout today and bring them back here at dawn tomorrow. As the sun rises, we shall see what we shall see." All the people present were amazed. "Sticks of power?" they exclaimed. The sticks looked so ordinary. They compared the sticks with each other and they looked the same. Some were thicker or thinner, but they all had equal length. The guards then gave way by moving backwards in order to allow everyone leave. No one was allowed to ever turn their back on the king. The king then beckoned on his favorite wife with a finger, and everyone saw him whispering into her ear as she knelt down before him. "The thief is as good as caught. The stick will catch him," the king said with a wild smile. "This night, the stick of the thief will increase in length. It will be 3 fingers longer, but don't tell anyone I said so." On hearing this, she nodded her head. Once the king left through the carved doorway, all the wives, children, and servants surrounded the favorite wife to find out what the king had said. But she was a very careful woman. She didn't say anything to any of them. The only person she told was her best friend, who was a trustworthy woman too. Her friend told only her mother and her wise old auntie. But strangely, before the day had ended, every single person who had been in the square knew that by dawn the next day, the thief's stick will be longer by 3 fingers. Night came as quickly as it usually did, and immediately the night was over, everyone gathered at the square with their sticks in their hands. Once the sun had fully risen in the sky, Zafuza emerged with a gleaming spear in his hand, staring suspiciously at the people. The king also appeared. He was carried on his special traveling bed with ostrich feathers. Besides him was the chief builder in the kingdom, walking closely with a measuring rod in his hand. Now the measurements began. Stick after stick was measured all round the square, and none of the sticks had added even as much as a fingernail in length. But there was one particular stick, carried by a servant who was sweating profusely with a shitty look in his eyes. His stick was exactly 3 fingers shorter than everyone's stick. "Take him!" yelled the king to the guards. "Feed him to the lions." The thief immediately forgot that the ring protected him from all harm and fell on his knees, pleading and crying profusely. He took off the ring from his hand, which he had been hiding, and gave it to the king. He kept crying and begging for mercy. The king was so pleased that he set the thief free. He was no longer sent to the lion's den, but was rather asked to run around the city 3 times as punishment. The children chased all the way around with their sticks. "How did you manage that?" the king asked Zafusa in his private chamber. Zafusa stood watching the king as bags of gold were brought out from the king's treasury. "Your magic must be even stronger than the magic of this ring." "Not really," Zafusa said. "I told you it will not need magic. All it needed was a very guilty man. He knew that he was the thief, so well that he believed his stick has grown 3 fingers in length during the night. Out of fear, he cut off that length and thought no one would notice." Zafusa then tied up the bags of gold the king had given him in his spare bag made of sheepskin. He then bowed down to the king and said, "There is more than one kind of magic, Your Majesty." The moral of this story is 1. Wisdom is a form of magic. A lot of times we wait on supernatural help when the solution to our problems might just need a little bit of wisdom, creativity, and effort. This is especially applicable in Africa. A lot of Africans wait for miracles and pray for God to transform our continent when wisdom can easily do that. Number 2, guilt makes people to easily expose themselves. It was guilty conscience that made that servant to cut off his stick, so stay away from evil. There are also 2 bonus tips I would like to leave. Number 1, fear can make us forget how powerful we are. That servant forgot the power of the ring because of fear. Number 2, act confident and people will automatically think you have everything under control. Zafusa acted confident to the extent he was able to convince them that the sticks were magical even when they weren't. Number 3. A secret is no longer a secret once you tell someone, but you can actually use a false secret to create the image of yourself that you want. People tend to believe that because something appears to be a secret, then it must be true. Once again, our ancestors keep sharing their wisdom through folktales like this. Our ancestors are indeed wise. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more African folktales like this, stories, history, and cultural insights. I hope you enjoy content like this. Bye and see you in the next video.